I never expected to work for the CIA. It wasn't something I dreamed of as a child or pursued through military service. It came to me out of nowhere, like an unspoken invitation to a world I had no idea existed. It started when I was living a quiet life in rural Virginia, working a mundane job in data analysis. My days consisted of staring at numbers and deciphering meaningless patterns. But one evening, a strange phone call changed everything. The voice on the other end was cold, detached, almost mechanical. "You've been selected," the voice said. "Your skills are needed for a project with national security implications. We'll be in touch." The line went dead before I could say anything. At first I thought it was a prank, some elaborate joke. But then a letter arrived, hand-delivered, with no return address. Inside was an invitation, plain and simple. Come to Washington, D.C. for an interview. No explanation, just a time and date. I hesitated, of course. It seemed too bizarre to be real. But there was something nagging at me, some inexplicable pull that I couldn't ignore. After a restless night, I packed my bags and took the first train to D.C. I arrived at the CIA headquarters on a quiet Wednesday morning. The building stood like a fortress, windows dark and foreboding. The security was like nothing I had ever seen before. Armed guards, metal detectors, and ID checks at every corner. Once through the security gauntlet, I was led into a sterile, windowless room that felt as though it had been designed to strip any sense of individuality from its inhabitants. At the head of the table sat a man in a black suit, his face stern and unreadable. "Sit," he instructed, his voice sharp. I sat, trying to mask my nervousness, though I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. Another man, wearing glasses and holding a tablet, sat beside him. The first man spoke again. "You've been chosen for a very specific reason. We've been tracking you for months, analysing your background, your work, your habits. You've shown a keen understanding of data, but more importantly, you've demonstrated the ability to notice things that most people overlook. That's a valuable trait." My heart raced. I had never known I was being watched. The man in the black suit continued. "The project we are working on is classified. It deals with something that could shake the foundations of everything you've been taught about the world. The very fabric of reality, as you know it, is a lie. What we are going to show you will change the way you see everything." My mind raced. "What is this project?" The man stood up, walked to a wall, and pressed a hidden button. A large screen descended from the ceiling, flickering to life. On it, a series of maps appeared, each more complex than the last. "This is the Earth, or at least what you've been told is Earth," he said, pointing at the map. "But it's wrong. Everything you know about the shape of the world is a carefully crafted illusion. The Earth is not a globe, as you've been led to believe. It's something far more terrifying." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. My mind struggled to process what I was hearing. The man in the suit wasn't done. "We've been working with a secret group of scientists for decades, trying to unravel the true nature of the Earth. What we've discovered will horrify you. It's not just the shape that's different, it's the way the world operates. It's not even a planet at all." The lights flickered as if to emphasize his words. He pointed to the screen, which now displayed a diagram of concentric circles. "This is what the Earth really looks like, a flat, layered structure with enormous walls around it. And beyond those walls, well, that's the part we haven't figured out yet. There are forces at work, forces we don't understand, keeping us from seeing the truth." I was given access to an extensive database of classified documents and research. The more I read, the more my perception of reality began to crack. The history books, the scientific papers, the very fabric of knowledge that had shaped my life, all of it was a lie. The CIA had been covering up the truth for centuries, controlling the flow of information to the masses. What lay beneath the surface was far darker. In secret underground labs, scientists had been studying the Earth's true structure for years. They had discovered that the Earth was not a smooth, rotating sphere, but a flat, layered construct, each layer more bizarre and incomprehensible than the last. What struck me most was the evidence of these walls. Massive vertical structures that surrounded the known world. They were impenetrable, uncharted, and utterly indestructible. No one knew who had built them or why they existed. The scientists had theorized that these walls were designed to contain something terrifying that mankind was not meant to know. I spent weeks at CIA headquarters, poring over documents, analyzing satellite images, and speaking with the scientists who had uncovered the truth. But the more I learned, the more I realized that something wasn't right. There were gaps in the data, discrepancies that made no sense. The deeper I dug, the more I felt like I was being watched, like something or someone was following me, keeping tabs on my every move. I could hear strange noises in the halls at night, footsteps echoing in the distance, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Every time I asked questions, the answers I received became more vague, more cryptic. It was as if the closer I got to the truth, the more the world around me began to unravel. One night, while working late, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A series of documents hidden deep within the database revealed that the true shape of the Earth was not the only secret the CIA had been keeping. There were others. Other worlds, other dimensions, connected to ours in ways that no one could understand, and they were waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. As I read, a sense of dread washed over me. The walls surrounding the Earth weren't just to contain something. They were a barrier, keeping us from something far worse. And the CIA had known about it for decades. It wasn't long after that discovery that things began to spiral out of control. The once clean lines of my life began to fracture. I started seeing things, shadows in the corners of my vision, figures that seemed to move just out of sight. The whispers grew louder, and I could no longer tell if they were in my head or if something truly was watching me. One day, the man in the black suit called me into his office. His eyes were cold, unreadable. "You've seen too much," he said. "You've uncovered things that were never meant for your eyes." Before I could react, 2 agents stepped forward, their hands on their guns. "We have to silence you now," the man in the suit continued, "for your own safety and for the safety of the world." I barely managed to escape, fleeing into the streets of DC, but the city felt alien to me now. Nothing seemed real. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. I was being hunted. The truth had been revealed, and it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The Earth was not what we thought it was. It was a prison, a containment system for something far older, far darker than humanity could ever comprehend. But the worst part, I realized that I wasn't the first to uncover the truth. Many before me had vanished. Some were silenced by the CIA, others lost in the cracks between dimensions, trapped beyond the walls of the Earth. And soon I would join them, because the truth is always far more dangerous than the lie. For days after my escape from the CIA, I lived in a constant state of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to have a face. Every sudden movement in my peripheral vision felt like an agent ready to apprehend me. I had nowhere to go, no one I could trust. The safe houses I had read about in espionage novels weren't real. There was no escape. The truth was, I had become a ghost, an unwanted piece of information too dangerous to keep alive. My every action was being tracked. I couldn't even step into a coffee shop without feeling eyes on me. I had to go deeper. If I was going to survive, I needed to find out exactly what I was dealing with. I started contacting people from my past, old acquaintances who might know something about covert operations or secret organizations. I went underground, working through encrypted communication channels. The walls were closing in, but I refused to give up. One contact, a former contractor for the Department of Defense named Evan, responded to my inquiry. I hadn't heard from him in years, but when I sent a vague message hinting at the knowledge I had uncovered, he immediately arranged a meeting. His response was a mixture of concern and fear. He'd been in the same circles as me once, but after he had accidentally learned about certain classified projects, he had been silenced, quietly forced into retirement. Our meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of DC, a place so dilapidated it looked like it had been forgotten by time. The air smelled of decay and dust. But inside, Evan was waiting. He was different. He had changed, both physically and mentally, in the years since we last spoke. His eyes were wide, constantly darting around the room, and his hand shook as he passed me a file. "I've been following your trail," he said, voice low. "I knew you were going to dig too deep, but I never thought you would get this far." He handed me the file, its contents far more shocking than I could have anticipated. It was filled with reports, old ones, going back decades, detailing the CIA's role in something far darker than I had ever imagined. There were mentions of a global consortium, a hidden network of elite figures who controlled not only the government but everything else beneath it, from the media to scientific research, even down to religious institutions. The most disturbing part, however, was a section on something referred to as the Eclipse Program. It was an operation that began in the 1940s, hidden beneath the Cold War's shadow, and it was designed to study and control the Earth's true shape. The more I read, the more I understood that the Earth wasn't just a flat plane contained by walls. It was part of an intricate system, a structure that wasn't entirely Earth at all. This Eclipse program wasn't just about concealing the truth. It was about studying it. Evan confirmed the existence of what he called the null zones, regions that fell outside our known Earth, connected to other dimensions or realities. And even more terrifying, these null zones were growing, expanding, and the walls were weakening. The time would soon come when something would break through, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for centuries. "It's all connected," Evan whispered, his voice shaking. "The CIA, the walls, the other dimensions, it's all one big experiment, and if they don't stop it, if they don't close the rift, all of it will collapse. We'll all be consumed." Evan's warning haunted me as I continued my search for answers. Every night I couldn't sleep. I dreamt of vast, barren landscapes, of impossibly high walls stretching beyond the horizon, and of a figure, shadowy and indistinct, waiting for me at the top, beckoning me closer. It was a presence I couldn't shake, like it was reaching through the very fabric of the earth to find me. One day, after weeks of searching, I uncovered something that seemed too absurd to believe. A set of coordinates pointing to a location deep in the Nevada desert. There was a research facility there, deep underground, that allegedly housed the key to understanding the true nature of the walls surrounding the Earth. I knew I had to go there, but Evan's warnings echoed in my mind. The CIA had a massive presence in the area, and they wouldn't hesitate to silence me permanently. Still, I couldn't back down now. Not after everything I had learned. I prepared for the journey, gathering the necessary equipment, but before I could leave, something happened that changed everything. It was a typical evening when the lights in my apartment flickered. Then came the knock on the door. I didn't hesitate. I knew it was them. Without a second thought, I grabbed my bag, bolted out the back door, and ran. For hours, I wandered through alleyways and side streets, but the agents were relentless. They were closing in. I couldn't outrun them much longer. It was then that I felt it. A shift in the air, a subtle pressure against my chest. The ground beneath me seemed to hum, vibrating like a massive machine coming to life. And then it happened. The rift opened. Out of nowhere, a massive tear appeared in the ground. Like a crack in reality itself, the world around me bent and twisted, as if the earth was tearing itself apart. From within the rift, I heard a sound. A low, guttural roar that made my bones rattle. The presence I had felt in my dreams, the figure at the top of the wall. It was no longer a mere dream. It was real. And it was coming for me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, but the fear was immediate, primal. A monstrous shape emerged from the rift, a towering figure that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like it wasn't entirely part of this world. Its eyes were like deep, swirling voids that drew me in, pulling at my very soul. I ran, but the agents were close. They had seen the rift too. They knew that something had gone wrong, something catastrophic, but they didn't seem afraid. No, they were prepared. They had been waiting for this moment. As I ran, I could feel their presence, not behind me, but ahead of me, waiting for me to reach the threshold. They were ushering me towards upward the rift, drawing me into its embrace just like they had planned all along. I didn't know how much time had passed, but when I finally reached the coordinates, I was at the edge of a facility carved deep into the desert. There was no sign of life, no guards, no security checkpoints, just an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Inside, I found something that shook me to my core. A massive chamber, its walls lined with glowing symbols and charts I could barely comprehend. On the far wall was a massive screen, and it displayed what looked like a map of the Earth, but something was wrong. The map was shifting, moving, constantly changing. It was alive. And then I saw it. The true shape of the Earth, not flat, not spherical, but something else entirely. An enormous, multi-dimensional construct, interwoven with layers and realms beyond human understanding. The walls weren't just physical, they were dimensional barriers that separated the Earth from something far older, far more powerful than we could imagine. And as I stood there taking in the terrible truth, I understood. The Earth wasn't a prison, it was bait, a trap set by beings far beyond our comprehension. The CIA had known about them for decades, studying these forces, controlling the flow of information, and trying to keep us ignorant of the true horror lurking just beyond our walls. And now, it was too late. The rift was wide open, and the things that waited on the other side were coming for us. I was the last one to know, the last one to see the truth. And the worst part, it was just the beginning. The walls of the underground facility hummed with a sickly low vibration as I stood there, staring at the screen that displayed the impossible map of the Earth. I could feel my heart thundering in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a series of interconnected realms, a cosmic trap, a prison built not for us but for something far more terrifying. The maps and charts flickered in and out of focus, as though the truth itself was trying to hide from my mind. But there was no denying it. The Earth, as I had been taught to understand it, was nothing more than a facade. What I was looking at now wasn't Earth at all. It was something else, something older, and it was alive. The walls of the facility felt closer now, like they were pressing in on me. The humming had turned into a sharp, unbearable frequency that made my ears bleed. I stumbled backward, clutching the cold, metallic surface of the control console, trying to steady myself. And then I heard it. A whisper. No, not a whisper. It was more like a low growl, a voice that rumbled deep within the ground itself. Come closer. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I looked around, but the facility was empty, save for the machinery and the glowing symbols on the walls. There was no one here, no one except me. Come closer and understand the truth. I stumbled forward, almost against my will. My feet carried me toward the screen, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the shifting map. It was like a living organism, its surface writhing and pulsating with each passing moment. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, flickering with an unsettling intensity, and the growl intensified. The voice. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, an entity that existed outside the boundaries of reality itself. I could feel it brushing against my mind, seeping into the corners of my thoughts. It was ancient, malevolent, and it wanted me to see the truth. The walls are not just to contain us, the voice echoed. They are to keep us from what lies beyond, from what we are meant to become. The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared. This time, it wasn't just a map of the Earth. It was something else. An image of the sky, but not our sky. There were swirling vortexes, dark clouds, and lightning crackling in colours that didn't exist in this world. It was a sky full of broken stars, fragments of a universe torn apart. The truth of the Earth is not just its shape, the voice continued. It is a prison, a holding place, a cage for us and for them. And when the walls break, everything will return to its rightful place. You too will return. The words didn't make sense, not at first. But as they echoed in my mind, I began to understand. This was it. The final truth. The Earth wasn't just a flat plane. It wasn't just a prison. It was a fragment of something larger, something that had been shattered, and now the pieces were starting to come back together. My mind reeled as the images on the screen shifted again. A massive structure far beyond anything I had ever seen loomed before me. An alien city stretching endlessly across the horizon, its towers towering into an alien sky. The architecture was both beautiful and horrific, a blend of organic and mechanical, of flesh and metal. We were not the first, the voice whispered, and we will not be the last. As the voice faded, a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing. The reality I had understood was gone. I wasn't just on the edge of some conspiracy. I'd stumbled into something far more ancient, far more terrifying than I could comprehend. But there was one thing that I understood clearly: the rift, the tear in the fabric of space that had opened in the desert. It was no accident. It wasn't just a crack. It was the beginning of something inevitable. And whatever was waiting beyond it wasn't going to remain hidden much longer. The walls were weakening. I turned from the screen, my mind buzzing with the knowledge I had uncovered. But before I could process it, a heavy door at the far end of the facility opened with a groan, and a figure stepped inside. It was Evan. But he wasn't the same as before. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated, and his face was pale as if the very act of coming near the rift had drained the life out of him. "You shouldn't have come here," he gasped, his voice hoarse. I didn't know how to respond. The fear, the dread, and the overwhelming sense of unreality were suffocating. I looked back at the rift in the screen. It was still there, slowly expanding. "I've seen it," I said softly. "I've seen what's beyond." Evan's lips quivered, and he stepped closer to me, grabbing my arm with a vice-like grip. "You don't understand. You don't know what you've unleashed. The walls aren't just crumbling, they're being broken. And when they fall, everything we've known will cease to exist." I struggled to free myself from his grasp, but his eyes were frantic, his breath quick and shallow. "It's already started." I looked at him in confusion, trying to comprehend his words. And then, as if to prove him right, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The walls of the facility shook violently, and a deep rumble sounded from somewhere deep beneath the earth. The rift was growing. "We're too late," Evan said, his voice trembling. "The void is already coming." Before I could ask what he meant, a burst of light filled the room, blinding me for a split second. When the light faded, I found myself standing in a new place, an entirely different reality. The walls of the facility were gone. I was no longer in the Nevada desert. The world around me was not Earth. It was a place beyond. A strange, alien landscape stretched out before me, vast, empty, and terrifying. The sky above was black, not like the night, but as if the sky itself had been torn apart. The air was thick with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Evan's face was gone, replaced by something else, a silhouette of a figure that didn't belong here. I couldn't make out its form, but I could feel its presence, immense and ancient. It reached out toward me, and suddenly I knew. The truth wasn't just about the Earth. The Earth itself had been a vessel, a holding place for something that was not meant to exist. The rift wasn't just a tear, it was the return of an ancient force that had been banished, imprisoned in our world for millennia. And now it was breaking free. The figure reached out, its massive shadowy form, engulfing everything around me. The reality I had once known, the buildings, the people, the Earth itself, faded away as if they were never real. It was as though the very fabric of existence was being unraveled, piece by piece. I could hear it now, a voice. No, more like a chorus of voices, whispering in a language I could not understand. It was an ancient language, one older than time itself. And then one voice broke through the rest, clear and terrifying. "You were never meant to know." The walls around me, no, the boundaries of this reality, disappeared. The rift wasn't just opening in space, it was opening in time, in the very nature of existence itself. The laws of physics broke apart, time fractured. And then I understood. The Earth wasn't just a shape, it wasn't just a place. It was a containment system, a fragile illusion to keep something far worse imprisoned. The walls weren't made of stone or metal. They were made of reality itself. And now that reality was collapsing. As I looked around, the world started to break apart, crumbling like dust in the wind. I heard a scream, my own but distant, and I realized with horror that I wasn't just watching the end of the Earth. I was witnessing the end of everything. The void was consuming everything. The rift had opened. The walls had fallen. And now there was nothing left. The void stretched infinitely, consuming everything. Warping time and space around me, my body was no longer tethered to the Earth as I had once known it. The sensation of weightlessness overtook me, as though gravity itself had abandoned me, replaced by something far more unsettling. My mind raced, trying to grasp onto anything that could make sense of this all-encompassing collapse. I could no longer feel the air, the warmth, or the familiar pull of the ground beneath my feet. The very idea of up and down had lost all meaning. I was adrift in a reality that wasn't a reality at all. The boundary between dimensions had crumbled, and what I had once thought of as the Earth was just another layer in the infinite, an illusion I had been trapped in. And then there was a voice again, one that echoed throughout this infinite expanse, a presence distant but undeniable. "Welcome home." The words reverberated within me, as though they were inside my very bones. I didn't know where they came from or who they belonged to, but I understood what they meant. This was home. I had never belonged on Earth. My existence, my very being, had been an anomaly, a construct, a misunderstanding, and now I was free. Free to return to the truth. I wasn't sure how long I had been drifting, trapped in this cosmic current. It could have been moments or lifetimes. Time, if it still existed, was irrelevant. What was certain was that there was no escape from this, no way back. The walls had fallen, and the forces that had once been contained had come pouring through. And as they did, I could see them. The entities. At first they were faint impressions, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision, but as the void deepened, they became clearer, more solid. Twisted forms shifting between states of being, ancient and vast. They were not humanoid, not even close. Their presence was overwhelming, like looking into the abyss of the cosmos and realizing that the abyss was looking back. They had been here all along, lying dormant behind the veil of reality, waiting for the day when the walls would break and they could return. They were the architects of the rift, the beings who had created the earth not as a home, but as a prison, a containment system. And now that system had failed. "You have seen what no one was ever meant to see," one of them whispered. Its voice was like 1,000 screams smothered by a tidal wave. "But you are not ready. You never were." Suddenly the void around me began to ripple, and the air shifted. I felt something closing in, a presence far more immediate than the formless entities that surrounded me. I looked, but there was nothing to see except the endless abyss. Then, without warning, I was hurled forward, faster than I could comprehend. The void shattered, splitting like glass under an unimaginable force. The darkness around me twisted and contorted, as if it were being torn apart, revealing a vast, open space beyond. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. A place that was both everywhere and nowhere. A place outside of time, outside of space. A place beyond the walls. And then I saw it. The true shape of the universe. The walls had not just confined the earth, they had confined everything. What I thought of as reality was just a speck, a fragment of a much grander design, hidden away in a pocket of space and time. The rift was not just an opening between Earth and another dimension. It was an opening between dimensions, between the fabric of creation itself. And what had once been a prison had now become an opening to something much larger. I couldn't even begin to describe it. It was an endless expanse, not of stars, but of infinite layers. I saw dimensions folding in on themselves, entire universes crumpled like pages in a book. I saw galaxies colliding, timelines stretching into infinity, bending and warping as they collided with one another. It was like looking at a map of the multiverse, but it wasn't a map. It was the actual structure of existence itself, unraveling and recombining in ways that defied understanding. And then, amid all of this chaos, I saw something I had been desperately trying to avoid. Myself. I stood, or rather existed, as a tiny fragment in this vast expanse. But it wasn't just me, it was all of me. Every possible version of myself, from every timeline, every dimension. Every choice I had ever made, every path I had ever taken was laid bare before me. I was not one person, but all of them. Every me that had ever existed, and every version of me that would ever exist. The realization was overwhelming. This was the truth of existence, the interconnectedness of everything, the infinite nature of choice, and the reality that there was no one truth, no one reality. There were only layers, a sprawling, interwoven web of possibilities and outcomes, each existing simultaneously, each one as real as the last. "You are free," the voice said again, "free to choose, free to become." But the freedom wasn't a relief. It was terrifying. I wasn't just trapped in the earth anymore. I was trapped in something far worse, the infinite labyrinth of existence itself, a maze with no end. And yet, at the center of it all, I knew there was something far worse waiting for me. The force that had created this place. The architect. The one who had set everything into motion. "You are the last," the voice whispered. And I knew it wasn't speaking to me as an individual. It was speaking to all the versions of me that existed. And when the last one falls, the true game will begin. The rift had opened. But it was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a cycle, an endless return to the start, a game of survival that had been played across countless realities, countless lifetimes. And now I was caught in it, unable to escape. As the void continued to twist and shape itself around me, I realized the truth. This was not just the end of Earth. This was the end of everything. The walls that had once kept us safe, that had contained the rift, had not just been boundaries. They were a line of defense, a defense against the collapse of all things. The rift was the beginning of the breakdown of the structure of reality itself. The Earth had been part of a larger mechanism, a cosmic trap set by forces far beyond comprehension, and now that trap was failing. And as I floated in that space, between worlds, between realities, I understood the final lesson. There was no escape. There had never been an escape. The Earth had been a prison, but so was everything else. The rift had opened because it was meant to open. And once it had, the end of all things had begun. The cycle of creation and destruction would continue endlessly until the final piece fell into place. I could hear the voices again, louder this time. The chorus of the entities, those ancient beings that had created this web of existence. They were coming, and I could feel their presence growing stronger. The rift had become a gateway, not just between worlds, but between the very fabric of existence itself. And soon, the final truth would be revealed. The Earth was only one chapter in a story that had no end. And in the end, all that would remain was the endless void. I could feel the rift now, not as a distant, vague presence, but as a palpable force, suffusing everything around me. It thrummed through my chest, my bones, my very soul. The walls of this cosmic prison had crumbled, and the floodgates were wide open, letting in all the chaos and devastation that had been sealed away for eons. The voices in my mind grew louder, more insistent, each one whispering their own promises, threats, and truths. I tried to block them out, to focus on something, anything, other than the impending doom that loomed on all sides. But it was impossible. One voice stood out from the rest. It was different, more solid, more tangible. It was not a whisper or a chorus, but a single, deep, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through the very core of my being. You have been chosen. I turned, trying to locate the source of the voice, but the void had no edges. There was no up or down, no direction to follow. The rift was everywhere, consuming everything, yet also somehow expanding beyond everything I knew. I was no longer within the Earth or its confines. I was outside of time and space. You have always been chosen, the voice continued, even when you did not know. It was familiar. The words felt like they were meant for me, yet I'd never heard them before. There was something deeply unsettling about the voice. It was like the voice of a god, a creator, or maybe something far darker. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my mouth. Instead, my thoughts raced, desperately trying to understand. The cycle has always been, it said. The Earth is one of many prisons, many worlds, many gates. The rift you opened is just the beginning of the end. But you, the voice paused, as if considering something. You are the key. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. I was adrift, lost in this endless void, yet I could still sense the enormity of what was happening around me. The shifting, warping of the very fabric of existence itself. The boundary between dimensions had collapsed, and the forces that had been contained for so long were now loose. But I was the key. What did that even mean? It is your choice, the voice said, almost like it was reading my thoughts. You can close the rift. You can return everything to its original state. You can stop the unraveling of the worlds. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. A way to undo this madness, to restore the Earth and the reality that had once been so familiar to me. Maybe I could make things right. Maybe I could save the world. But the voice wasn't done. But you must understand, it warned, the price will be high. Closing the rift means the return of what was imprisoned. It means the return of the true creators, the architects of the multiverse. It means the end of the earth as you know it, the return of chaos. I struggled to process the enormity of it all. These creators, these ancient forces, had they always been here, watching us, guiding us from the shadows? Were we merely pawns in a game, much larger than we could comprehend? And what did it mean to close the rift? To undo the very fabric of existence that had been fractured? The voice went on, the decision weighing heavily on me. The rift has to stay open, but only for a time. You must choose, close the gate, and everything returns to its original order, but at a cost. Or leave it open, and the destruction continues. But you remain a part of the cycle. You will be more than you were. You will transcend. Transcend. The word echoed in my mind. What could that possibly mean? The price was already too high. My soul, my very existence, had been shattered by the truth I had discovered. There was no going back, no way to return to the life I had known. The only thing left was this choice, this moment of finality. I tried to understand the implications of my options, but the more I thought about them, the more the very concept of choice seemed irrelevant. The universe had been designed this way, from the very beginning, from the moment the first rift was opened. It was always going to end like this. There was no escaping the pull of the rift, no escape from the forces that had created this reality. And then I realized something that made my heart freeze. The voice, it wasn't asking me to make a choice for myself. The choice is not for you, it whispered. The choice is for everything. I was not the key in the way I had thought. The rift was not a personal matter. It was universal. The decision I was about to make would not only affect me or the Earth, but the entire multiverse. All the countless worlds, the infinite timelines, every possible version of reality was at stake. My choice would determine the fate of them all. "What will you choose?" the voice asked again, as if testing my resolve. The pressure was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to refuse, but the truth of the matter was this: I had no control. I had never had control. I had been a piece in a game I didn't even understand. A player in a story that had been unfolding long before I ever took my first breath. But in that moment, I also understood something else. The voice, the presence, was not some omnipotent force. It was part of the cycle. It was part of the machine, the system of the multiverse that had been set in motion eons ago. The rift was the end, and the end was inevitable. Whether I closed it or left it open, whether I chose destruction or transcendence, there was no escaping the fundamental truth of existence. The walls had fallen. The return of the creators had already begun. There was no stopping it. And so I made my choice. The rift shimmered before me, its edges curling and twisting as I reached out, my fingers brushing the space between worlds. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. I closed my eyes, and in the instant I did, the universe seemed to hold its breath. For just a moment there was nothing. No sound, no light, no space. Everything was frozen in a single, infinite heartbeat. And then, everything collapsed. Reality, in all its infinite forms, twisted and tore apart. The cosmic layers shattered like fragile glass, and the rift that had opened began to close. But as it did, the world around me began to change. The space I was in, the nothingness, began to pulse, to flicker, as if it was being rewritten, reformed. The choice I had made had set in motion something much larger than I could ever comprehend. The rift had closed, yes. The multiverse was returning to order, but the price was far greater than I had anticipated. There were no more voices, no more entities, no more forces to shape the world. Only silence. And in that silence, I realised that the rift had not been the end of the cycle. It had been the beginning. The beginning of a new story, one where the past and future had become indistinguishable. A world where the earth and all its shattered realities were reborn. But they were reborn without me. The story had ended, but the next one had just begun.